used a PDF on the night, the other night, and it worked. But it won't, but.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hi. How's everybody doing? Is this on? Good afternoon. Hello, Portland. I'm just kidding. I gave her a hard time earlier. I'm not going to do it here. I want to thank, are we recording? Okay. I want to thank all of you and the people watching at home for your participation in what I would consider as one of the most important processes that we have undertaken in the last several years. You know, the built environment isn't just some fluffy phrase that we throw out there to do whatever. It's true. For the communities that invest in the built environment, we see time and time again, those are the communities that are the most successful. And we've invested a whole bunch of time and money and effort, sweat, blood, and tears, and whatever else into this process because we believe that strongly in it. It's not enough to have new availability of liquor licenses or great staff or whatever it may be, or even development. The public infrastructure side of this has to match that. And we intend to make our public infrastructure world-class at all turns. And so this, I hope you will invest your time with us, and I, again, thank all of you for participating because this is now, what, the third time we've talked. So I hope you will invest your time and continue to invest your time in our efforts. These are going to pay heavy dividends for us in the future. And I am going to introduce, straight from Portland, Oregon, Marcy McAnally. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for having us over the last few days. We've really learned a lot about your community and had a great time meeting with people who dropped in and people who were part of the meeting, the formal meetings that we had. We've been very welcomed, and it's been wonderful. So we called our project here the Whole 9 Mile as a little joke. I want to review some of the goals that you articulated so well in application that funded this project that brought us here, because it's been our mission over the last few days, and it has actually seemed to resonate and be confirmed by all the citizens that met with us too. We're actually surprised at the amount of consistency and support over the last few days for these ideas. Let me just go through them. There are overarching goals for infrastructure in Oak Park: that streets should connect people to goods and services, that 9 Mile road corridor should be more walkable. It may actually become the site for a catalyst for economic development, and all of the work that's focused on the infrastructure improvement should be mindful of that catalyst for economic development. And then a goal, not a small goal, is to further define an area for Oak Park downtown. Specifically, goals that were articulated for the 9 Mile corridor include reallocating the street space for more community-serving uses. So it won't be just going into the future about moving cars through, but rather bringing people to jobs and retail and recreational opportunities along 9 Mile. Encourage biking with dedicated bike lanes. Integrate bike parking and bike storage to serve transit riders. Make crossing 9 Mile on foot and bike safe and convenient and frequent, much more frequent than the opportunities are currently. Provide greater visibility and identity for commercial businesses. Create some public gathering places, and create a heart for the Oak Park community and bring green into the center. So our charge over the last 3 days has been to create a street redesign concept for 9 Mile and engage with stakeholders that included everyone from general public members who dropped in and to a lot of your city staff members who will be in charge of implementing these ideas. We collected information and data that will help us do a good job with our recommendations, so they're sound. I want to stress that they are still in the idea stage, though, and they need a lot more vetting by all of the experts here in town. And providing additional overarching guidance how to make Oak Park more walkable, not just on 9 Mile, but in other areas. And I think also one of the greatest things about these events that we call these charrettes that we're involved in is that people talk to each other about the projects that they're involved in, and they make connections. And every time somebody talks to somebody else, a new connection is made. We get new ideas, and I hope that you've enjoyed that as much as we have. The process we've engaged in the last 3 days was, on the first day, we took a tour of the 9 Mile corridor, and we had an evening public workshop that I see some of you attended. On day 2, we met one-on-one with, we had 2 meetings going on at every moment at the same time, where we met with people from Ferndale who have very successfully done a street rethinking for their portion of 9 Mile. We met with every public works person and even some of the property owners, and gathered a lot of information from that, so much that we thought our heads were going to explode. And then we had an open studio as well, where people could drop in and comment again on the things that people had commented on the night before, because we had Post-its up on the wall. And all that time we were trying to get a moment away and draw concepts up. So this morning we really finalized some of those concepts. They're very rough still, but I think there's some good ideas here, and we're going to present them right now. On that first night, we asked, how important is biking, on-street parking, pedestrian amenities, street trees and green infrastructure such as rainwater gardens, and transit rider amenities. And we invited people to name anything that was missing from that list, and then we asked them to prioritize the needs on 9 Mile. And it was an interesting exercise because we got both individual perspectives, but we also got quite a lot of group consensus. And in the end, then the 4 tables, the 30 people who were there and that gathered into 4 separate tables, had conversations that really mirrored each other. And they reaffirmed that biking is extremely important. On-street parking may be important in certain areas. The top things we heard was that pedestrian and biking were the most important things. Transit was important as well, but further down on the list. And then there were a lot of interesting ideas for art and performance art and facade improvement to the buildings, different things to make riding transit much more enjoyable and predictable. So those all have gone onto the list and been documented and will be part of the final document for this project. The top 3 then that we are going forward with and making sure that they're included in every one of our recommendations is that the pedestrian and walkability is kind of paramount. We do want to provide end-to-end bike infrastructure, and we want to bring green into the corridor in very different ways into each of the segments. And we're building on previous work that was done, specifically the Strategic Economic Development Plan. And we'll refer to some of these later in the presentation, but just to get started, I would like to point out that the 9 Mile Road Diet, as it's called, was first identified in this document, and I want the arrows point to a particular part of that page that indicates 9,000 is the traffic count for 9 Mile, which makes it an ideal candidate for complete rethinking of the traffic. 9,000 trips is not a lot, and it's currently very much over-designed for the current capacity of automobiles. So we talked a lot on the first evening about the principles of the new urbanism and how you design a more democratic allocation of that public space by bringing bikes and people in more, creating more space for stormwater and nature, and that seemed to resonate with people. So our recommendations then, I'm going to go through some of them and then hand it over to Ken. First, in order to understand the recommendations, we felt we needed to understand the different character areas of 9 Mile, and from the end, from Greenfield to the western edge at Ferndale, we identified 5 distinctly different character areas. And it's even more complicated a little bit because in some areas there will be one character area on the north and another character area on the south. And each of these demands some unique solutions. So let me just go through the 5 areas one by one and what our recommendations are for those. In character area 1, which both predominates at the eastern and western ends of 9 Mile and is the largest single character area of 9 Mile, it's mostly single-family residences facing the street. They can be attached. Many of those are duplexes, and some of those are 2-story buildings. They have driveways that open onto 9 Mile, so there's potentially a lot of conflicts that could occur between cyclists and drivers coming in and out of the driveways, the drivers and the cyclists going by. So we're very mindful of that as we're designing the bike facility. An example of this character area number 1 is the area between Radcliffe and Church. So here you can see on the north side some of the driveways. You can see that character predominantly residential facing 9 Mile. So one of the things that we've talked about to create a safe, a really great biking facility along 9 Mile, not just your kind of old-fashioned bike lane that's 5 feet wide and then cars rushing past. We would like to be able to do something here that's continuous from end to end and is kind of more advanced and recognizes the latest and greatest practices of bike facility design. This is called a buffered bike lane, and what I know there are other terms that are used in Michigan for this, but this is the term I'm going to use for this presentation. It's buffered. What makes it buffered is that striped area to the left. That gives it a little extra width. In addition, what makes this one extra buffered is those cars there are actually parked, And so the parked cars provide an additional barrier between the cycling and the passing cars. And what cities have found when they install these kind of bike lanes is that a lot more families use them, a lot more people who they call the capable but concerned cyclists will use these where they might not have gotten out onto the road on a more old-fashioned kind of bike lane. So we think this should be one of the priorities. You have abundant right-of-way. It's possible to have a bike lane like this from end to end, and that's been one of our goals. Here's an example of that buffered bike lane, though, on the outside edge of parked cars. So these are two options that we're bringing forward for you to consider. For every one of the character areas, we're providing at least two options for consideration because there still remain a lot of discussion that you as a community have to have about what to do instead. And here's an example of those are called usually trade-offs. And here's an example of a trade-off in this character area 1. We found by measuring out the street and laying in a buffered bike lane that you could have on-street parking and a buffered bike lane and narrow that drive area to 1 lane in each direction. And that would go into the space where the curbs now define. So no curbs would be moved to make this possible. But this is one option, and another option would be then to not have the on-street parking, but rather to have a green median instead. And you can picture these are two very, very different options. This one would be much more residential character, perhaps more park-like and pastoral, whereas the other one would provide some maybe needed on-street parking for the residences. So we leave you with these two options to consider. Character area number 2 has strip shopping centers on one side of the street that's occurs more on the north side. These are low 1-story buildings, very viable retail buildings. Most of them have alleys and service access at the rear. They're very similar to buildings in Ferndale in terms of their depth and their vintage and stock construction type. So there's really nothing, I think, that prevents these from becoming very viable retail in the future. But retail usually needs on-street parking to make it viable. And so we looked very closely at how that could be accommodated in these areas along with the bike lane. A typical character area number 2 would be Rosewood to Republic at the eastern end of 9 Mile. Here's an example of that 1-story retail and the parking. We noticed that in some areas parking had been carved out from the curb and back, but our plans did not rely on that technique to get on-street parking. We were trying to find a way to get on-street parking within the curb-to-curb area. Here's another area where there's quite a bit of these businesses have on-site parking, but not all of them do. So another typical example. So in those areas, we would propose that you think about providing on-street parking either outside of the buffered bike lane or with the bike lane on the outside of the parking. In character area number 3, we have that strip commercial and multi-dwelling residential. So this is kind of a combination of the kind of residential that might need visitor parking and the strip shopping centers that need parking to become more viable. There are a lot of driveways in this area, though, and that makes that creates a need for a lot of left turns. So I want to plant the idea that that median can be very useful for allowing left turns into driveways. So again, the trade-offs become a little bit more complicated. An example here at the eastern edge of 9 Mile where that multi-dwelling residential and strip commercial kind of exist side by side. So some of that residential, say on the left there, could benefit from on-street parking. And some of the strip commercial further down could benefit from on-street parking. But as we pointed out earlier, if you did that, you would need to do away with the median. So, but the planted median makes it easier for cars to turn into a driveway. Here's an example of some of the commercial that has parking in front. And I want to point out again the alleys at the rear, which make it easier for these businesses to get services, garbage, and deliveries off the alley. So that is really great for a commercial of this type. Another character area was where the linear park exists, or what people called the linear park. And during the public workshop, someone said this would be a great area for a dog walking park. And so we've looked at this as a location where the buffered bike lane, rather than being on the street, could actually be incorporated along with the path. The path would be made wider. It would be what we call a multi-use path with pedestrians and bicyclists using it together in both directions, possibly. So it would have to be pretty wide, but we do have a lot of right of width in that linear park. But it would be a great recreational amenity for the city. It goes on for my count, like 12 blocks in some of the areas, and there's both a segment at the western edge and a segment at the longer segment at the eastern edge. In this area, it's really important to bring the bicycles out at the intersection and not have them cross at the sidewalk for safety. So there's specific designs that would need to be incorporated at the intersection, but the intersections are very few and far between in this one area. So you can see the linear park in plan here, and a lot of pictures of it being used, or the sun shining on it in the evening. If this became more of a recreational amenity and this path became designed to accommodate multi-use walkers, dog walkers, strollers, people with strollers and people on bike, you would probably want to look at creating some places for people to stop and sit, maybe some places for equipment, fitness equipment. There are all kinds of things that you could do along the length of this linear park. So it may be helpful to think about some of the things that would be continuous from end to end versus those that would be intermittent. We think the planted median, to the extent possible, should be continuous. And the center turn lane needs to occur at intersections, the selected locations. And the on-street parking should be where there is business and possibly where there are multi-dwelling residences. What could be, and actually these are reversed. This is what we think should be consistent from end to end. The buffered bike lane, if you commit to making a bike facility and you commit to making kind of a first-class family serving bike facility, you really have to do that from end to end. And that means some other things have to be sacrificed to do that. Transit stops are very important. Pedestrians, walkways, and crosswalks, important all the way along indiscriminately of where you are. And of course, travel lanes, but we're going to reduce those. So sorry, to go back to this, we think the planted median is something you need to make a choice about, depending on the context or the character area. The center turn lane only needs to occur where you need to have that lane. Right now it's continuous, but you don't need it everywhere. And on-street parking should be where it serves the land uses nearby. Okay. So let's talk about the character area number 5, which is kind of where some of the bigger, longer-term ideas are. This is the big box retail at major street intersection of 9 Mile and Coolidge. It's an area that's gotten some study, and we met with one of the property owners. The buildings are set back from the street and have large parking lots and a super block structure. Here's that general area with Coolidge and 9 Mile exactly in the center. And one of the difficulties of this area is that it serves traffic coming down Coolidge, which while we have 9,000 trips approximately on 9 Mile, we have 20,000 plus on Coolidge. So there's significant movement going on, and you can see that in the intersection design. There are some right turn only lanes, such as this one right in front of the Tim Hortons, where the street gets extra wide, which means it's extra long for pedestrians to cross, and some of the planted areas get minimized. So while we might be able to reduce 9 Mile down to 2 lanes, one in each direction, and with a left turn lane, there still is a need to deal with the traffic on Coolidge, and we're going to talk about that more in a moment. There's some design here where the parking lots of these retailers are buffered, screened, and there's adequate landscaping. So we have good bones to work with in this area. We think there's a lot that you could do to make this place much more public and friendly and community serving. Here's a picture from Normal, Illinois, where there's a roundabout that kind of created a new downtown in this area, and it's actually used by the public as a communal gathering space. And we think this is maybe even a location for a monument to the city that's maybe a bit more than what you have right now. And it would be inside the street, kind of part of the street rather than around at the edges. We studied the economic development strategy quite a bit, and there's a very nice idea in here about introducing new streets. Specifically in the northwest corner, we talked to one of the property owners, the property owner there, and he was not scared away by this idea. Actually, he understood that introducing new streets, as where these arrows show, could add value and add the potential for new retail frontage and the possibility of some new mixed use or residential neighborhood to the back in an area of parking that's currently not very well utilized. And just to be clear, this new neighborhood, if it were created in the way that's shown on this drawing, its backyards would face the existing neighbors' backyards. It would be really completing a block that is kind of cut off in the middle right now. And we took this idea a little bit further and looked at what would happen if you had that new street coming down at Ridgedale. So this drawing shows this new section between Ridgedale and Coolidge Highway on the right, Ridgedale on the left, and how you might be able to create kind of public space in the middle of the street by pushing the buffered bike lane and the on-street parking to the edge. You'd still have a very adequate sidewalk. This is designed with a 15-foot sidewalk, and the buffered bike lane and the on-street parking, and it has a left turn lane. But the area between the left turn lanes is about a 38-foot wide spot for a range of uses that might include rainwater gardens, public plaza, pocket park. This could be a place where community gatherings occurred. And we looked at some examples around the country where similar things are being done. One great example is in Lancaster Boulevard in California. And you can see how this street was transformed to one lane in each direction. And they use the space off to the left, what would be the equivalent of the plaza space that we're proposing. They use it part of the time for diagonal parking. And the rest of the time they use it for festivals and on weekends and in evenings. So it's a multi-use space, very creative use of space. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ken, and he's going to talk more about specific street design from the engineer's perspective.
Thank you, Marcy. My name is Ken Voigt. I'm a traffic engineer working on this project with Marcy. A lot of the concepts we talked about require some engineering detail to check their feasibility and their safety, and I'd like to talk about it. There are some documents we're showing up here that really reflect the latest state-of-the-art in street design for urban areas to create great places and still accommodate pedestrians and bicycles and people and cars as well. One of the things, Marcy gave you some options at Coolidge and 9 Mile, is a possibility of a roundabout. And I've heard in some of our conversations lots of concerns about roundabouts, and I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I understand why it happens if it's new to you, but there's a lot to be said for roundabouts, and I want to spend a little time just explaining to you why they are so effective and such a great asset to community. They reduce traffic conflict points. I'll show you a diagram how simple they are. They reduce crashes. One of the biggest things is that they have a dramatic safety impact. Over the last 5 years, there were 74 crashes at the intersection of Coolidge and 9 Mile. And if you reduce that by 30% roughly, that's quite a significant savings in injuries as well as property damage. They reduce speeds. they're designed, you have to turn to go around them. People slow down. You're not going 35 miles an hour. They're designed to operate at 15 to 20 miles per hour. So it's a much safer, slower condition. They're very pedestrian friendly. People have the impression, oh, how do I get around, as a pedestrian? We'll show you some examples of how the roundabout works for a pedestrian. Traffic-wise, they work better than a traffic signal. They're kind of self-enforcing. And then they work during any time of the day on any type of volume. So they work great for trucks. And the nice thing is they also add some aesthetic. And if this is going to be the downtown center, you want some kind of statement. Right now we have a highway, if you want to call that 9 Mile Road. I don't look at it as a street with 5 lanes of pavement. And as you look down the road, you just see pavement after pavement after pavement. There's nothing distinctive. There's no view besides more pavement. It makes you feel like a highway, you should drive faster. It automatically blocks that vision view and creates an identity. It kind of creates a focal point for the downtown area and manages traffic. So those are some of the benefits. Here you can see the difference in conflicts. This is from a different project, but a typical intersection has like 32 conflict points, and you can see several of them here next to each other. When you reduce it into a roundabout, there's 8 conflict points. That's a huge difference where you interface. You cannot hit another car head on. You cannot typically have a right angle crash. Usually they're fender benders, and you're going slow at 15 miles an hour. So there's a significant difference there. If you're a pedestrian, and think about this, if you're struck by a car going at 20 miles per hour, there's a 15% chance that could result in a fatality. If that car is going between 30 to 40 miles per hour, there's a 45 to 85% that person is a fatality. What did I say a roundabout's designed for? 15 to 20 miles per hour. So you can just see the impact on safety and eliminating fatalities and creating a much more pedestrian-friendly condition. What we're looking at, and I'll show you a drawing shortly, what a roundabout might look like. We did a preliminary concept for it. We'd love to have a single lane all the way around. There's a couple of areas because of Coolidge where it's got to be 2 lanes. Where we have 2 lanes, the U.S. Access Board is pretty much directed to look at pedestrian push buttons to assist a pedestrian across the roadway. The nice thing about that is a pedestrian, whether it's 1 lane or 2 lanes, is oncoming traffic is going slower. You're only crossing like a one-way street because there's an island in the middle. So you only have to worry about traffic coming in one direction. And then you worry about the next direction as you get through the median area, if you want to call it that, the island. And then these are rapid flashing beacons. We just installed this in the first 2-lane roundabout ever constructed in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And that was a school crossing, and it's working very, very well and very safe. And there's a senior center right next to it as well. I think it was mentioned by Marcy, you can do a lot of landscaping. There's different treatments, low maintenance with native grasses and plants or sculptures and more permanent things that don't require landscape. This is a look down of the thing that we did in Cheyenne. It's a 5-legged, even more complex, and it works well. Here's another example of an urban roundabout. You can see the pedestrian crosswalks. You can see the islands in the middle of the roadway. It forces a car to turn a little bit as you enter the roundabout, and you're merging with a gap in traffic that's going through the roadway at 15 miles per hour. This is a concept drawing without the detailed traffic data and a topographic survey, but this is approximately what a roundabout would look like at Coolidge and 9 Mile. It really minimizes the impact on adjacent right-of-way. It fits within, if you're familiar with the walls, decorative walls that are on each of the corners. It fits within that footprint and accommodates the pedestrians, and you can see the center island, as we call it, where landscaping and so on can occur. So how do you drive a roundabout? And whenever you have your first roundabout, it requires an extensive education program. ARP is very supportive, AARP, of these things, and they will assist you in meeting with seniors and so on, having it taught in driver's ed classes. The neat thing is, when the kids learn this, they teach their parents about it. It's kind of like a reverse learning experience. They work very well, and it's very simple. You slow down and choose your lane, just like you would at a regular intersection. If you're gonna make a left turn or right turn, you're either in the left lane or the right lane, or if you're going through. Obviously, you're gonna yield to a pedestrian, which is required, and then prepare to enter the traffic, and you merge, you wait for a gap in traffic, and you merge with that traffic that's going in the circle, we call it. Once you're in a roundabout, I think the only thing you don't do is don't change lanes. There'll be pavement markings that said this is for right turns and through, or this is for left turns. And there'll be a sign ahead of time. This is the lane you want for this, or this is the lane you want to do for that movement. And then as you exit, you yield to the pedestrian. Again, same phenomena as you would at a regular intersection. And everybody's going slow, and you don't create crashes or safety problems. That's what I've got on roundabouts. I'd be happy to answer additional questions about it, because I know there's people aren't familiar with it. This is an example, though, of another enhancement you can do along 9 Mile. I think it's really, really critical. This is a project we just finished in the city of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which is my hometown. It carries about 17,000 cars a day, 1 lane in each direction, is operated extremely well. But we use some green paint at approaches to intersections to highlight the fact that this is a bike lane. You can see the on-street parking and so on that's there, and some of the driveways. The businesses are thrilled. They've got more people biking and coming to their businesses. They put some bike racks out on their own cost to accommodate that, and their businesses has improved. There was a recent article in the newspaper about how successful this was. But the addition of green, there's a cost with it, but it really makes a difference in creating a sense of place and character that this is a walkable, bikeable, friendly community. We identified, I was amazed when we came and we rode the corridor. There's really a lack of pedestrian crossings. The most important thing you need is a connected community if you're going to encourage people to walk. And if you've got bus stops and you don't have crosswalks there, whoever's on a bus is either on a bicycle or is on foot walking. And you need to allow them to get to the other side of the street without going 5 blocks or 3 blocks out of their way. So we're recommending continental pavement markings. There's an example there how an intersection would look. They're the wide bars. They're about 18 inches wide. They're white. That is the most visible pavement marking for anybody who's sight impaired. It is also the most visible pavement marking for traffic as they approach an intersection that will stand out compared to any of the other markings. They're aware this is a pedestrian area. People drive slower when they feel they're in a different environment than a highway environment, which we've kind of got set up there. Countdown timers where we've got traffic signals to be pedestrian friendly. I've seen pedestrians when it goes from walk to flashing don't walk, get halfway across and turn around and go back the other way. This tells you got 10 seconds left, 9 seconds left, 8 seconds left, and people continue crossing and they don't get anxious about it. And then to upgrade the ADA ramps for wheelchairs and so on, that they're not tilted, that they meet the design standards. There's a fine line between an adequate ADA ramp and a ramp that is really a problem for folks in wheelchairs. So those are some of the enhancements. And we've identified a set of intersections. Most of these are bus stop related. Some of our bus stops are mid-block, so I tried to pick a good spacing where we get some logic that we'd have a rhythm of crossings here. This is just for west of Coolidge. You can see a total of 7 intersections. Some of them already have crosswalks, but in this case, they would all have the marked crosswalks on both sides of the intersection, not just one side. Why do you have to walk all the way around to get where you're going? You should have a crosswalk on both sides. That's what the pedestrian expects. That's what the motorist expects. You're enhancing the pedestrian safety and experience there. When we get to the east side, a longer list. It's a longer segment of roadway, obviously, with more intersections. I'd highlight Oneida Avenue there because I think there's a wonderful opportunity to connect the community, the residential area that's on the south side of 9 Mile, there's a vacant property there. I think it'd be fairly inexpensive to acquire that property and put a sidewalk through there into the neighborhood. I think it connects to Troy Street. And that would increase the accessibility, because there's really a long stretch out there without any connections to 9 Mile Road. So those are considerations as well. And that kind of sums up some of the results that we've come up with and what we've seen and some options that are consistent with your previous work, but take it to another level of actually providing images where and how, and then there's some decisions that have to be made, you know, can we do on-street parking here, or should we have the median boulevard here? And that median boulevard is the safest facility we have compared to the center left turn lane that you have, or compared to just a yellow stripe down the roadway with a lane in each direction. So there's some decisions to be made there, but I think some options that will really create a different atmosphere along this corridor and a different image too of the city on how they're pedestrian friendly, they're bicycle friendly, we're calming traffic to make this thing work and improve the business atmosphere as well as the residential atmosphere. And with that, we're open to any questions and so on. I'd invite Marcy to come up here. She's our urban designer, and I'm the traffic engineer, and we kind of blend our thoughts and ideas together to look at the feasible options. Oh, I get asked that all the time. You notice I didn't show anything with palm trees in it. Roundabouts are extremely easy to, I've actually got a video that shows you, Public Works Department, you will usually ask that, and they go around the inner side and they go around the outer side, and then they go off just like they would a regular intersection. It's almost easier to clear than a standard intersection.
Because it's round.
Yeah. So it's not a problem.
Is it possible to use it for snow storage also, that space?
You usually plow to the outside. You don't plow it to the circle itself, because you can start creating snow and ice that will melt across the surface of the roadway, and you kind of want to avoid that where people are automatic. You've got to turn to go through the intersection. Good question, though.
Let's rephrase the question so that it can be.
Okay, the question is, some experience have been reported to have had problems when they reduced the number of lanes and created a different condition than they originally had. There's been a lot of research before-after studies on communities that have done this. I can tell you from all the technical aspects that a roadway with one lane in each direction and allowing left turns in an urban area can carry up to 17,000 at what we call design levels, which is what the public says is safe and convenient and not a lot of congestion. We're at 9,000. I asked the question, what if traffic increases and the economy keeps roaring and things like that? Even if we doubled the traffic volume on that street, we're still within, what we would expect a street to be designed for to operate at in a safe and efficient manner. And there's lots of studies that have kind of endorsed that. There's a separate document that just talks about that type of roadway and when they've been changed and how efficiently they operate and actually operate safer. The wider it is, the faster you're going to go. Any other thoughts or comments? Mayor.
Can you say your question again? The question was asked by the mayor, are we considering having the median in some areas and not in others? And it is our recommendation that it's one of the items that could come and go. It depends on the character that you're trying to create in that area. The most dramatic place where that choice is to be made, I think, is at the residential areas where you might want to provide visitor parking on street for especially for multi-dwelling or attached residential, because it's a little bit more dense. And especially on the eastern end, those people don't have long driveways, so they can't really park in their driveway. And they also don't have alleys. So on-street parking might be really useful for them. But there is an option, I think, that needs to be explored where you could park on one side of the street, and that might still give you room to have a planted median of size that you could plant good trees, good quality trees in.
There are, as we worked through this, there are a lot of variants of what we took as kind of like a basic cross-section design or street design, and tried to fit it to the different segments. We saw those 5 distinct segments along there. So it's one size doesn't fit all, and we got to look at the land use character to pick the right option. One bottom line is you have the continuous bike lane all the way through from end to end, and the crosswalk enhancements.
And I just want to add something too that was discussed earlier about the median does add a lot of green, and it can be a great source of identity. You know, we talked about on the first night, you are Oak Park. Wouldn't it make sense for you to have Oak Park be your identity and have that represented in the median? So everyone knows when they've entered Oak Park, the median tells them that in different ways through landscaping and through the presence of green. But we also recognize that you have really large plant strips, or the areas on the side of the street where there is between the sidewalk and the curb. Those areas are abundant, and they're not being used much for trees right now. You could plant more trees in those, and where you didn't have a median, then you could still have a canopy and the green park-like setting, but you would gain it from trees within the plant strip at the side of the street.
There was another question?
Yeah, just some remarks. On the studies of siting, I'm glad to see the city moving in this direction. I'm very apprehensive of roundabouts. We have a few in the community, not in Oak Park, but close by. And I would suggest people not to drive through them, but try to walk through them or ride a bicycle through them. It's extremely frightening. So I'm not sure I'm bristling with that thought of a roundabout.
Can I just make a
Can you
comment?
restate the
Yeah,
question?
the concern is a roundabout, because there are other communities that have had some issues with them, and is it really as great as it sounds? And some reservations that it's not.
For bicyclists and pedestrians.
Bikes or pedestrians. What I've seen, and communities where I've worked in, you'll have all the newspaper reporters, as you're talking about roundabouts, getting quotes from you. And say, oh, this is the worst thing, it's gonna be Armageddon, or it's not gonna work, and so on. And you'll see a follow-up, once it's built. Headlines, what took so long? When are you gonna build the next one? This is the greatest thing you've ever done. We need more of these. So those are the communities that I can reference where it's been done successfully. And we see a lot of references to those type follow-up articles as people were concerned. I presented to senior citizens when I explained to them how it actually works. And our seniors are pretty conservative, you know. They said, I get it, I understand it. That doesn't sound like the end of the world. I can deal with it, and I see all the benefits. So there's always a reservation for something new.
Well, I appreciate your opinion, but I disagree, and I think we have examples here that we can physically go to and use and experience and get that feel with feet on the ground. And that's just, I love it as a driver. I love what it's done to traffic. I don't like it as a pedestrian or a bicyclist. The other thing I'll just put out get a feel from it two-dimensionally. And we have the opportunity to get it, in live action. And I think it's exciting to experience.
Yes, ma'am.
How extensive is the education that AARP offers in terms of
AARP and our Federal Highway Administration has a lot of printed material. Federal Highway, if you go to their website, actually has videos that explain how they work and so on. And it's a matter of scheduling meetings, providing information to, in your community news or whatever, that all the residents get, holding some meetings with get a group together. Sometimes I've done it in church basements and so on. You want to go where the people are. And the first time through, think about this. When you are required to encounter something new and you're going to slow down, because you got to slow down to go through a roundabout. You can't race through it like 35 miles an hour at a regular signalized intersection. It requires you to slow down and think. Now, I don't really believe there's anything wrong with requiring somebody to slow down and think a little bit as they go through an intersection. And once you've done it a couple times, it's kind of like, wow, what's so hard about this? This is automatic. This is really, really great and it works fine for me. And you're not going to sit there in traffic, or you're not going to hit the gas to run a yellow light because you don't want to get stopped, those types of things. You don't get those kind of backups or delays, and creates a whole different driving atmosphere.
Any other questions? Great.
I don't know if, from the city's perspective, any way you want next steps or whatever?
So I want to thank everybody who came out over the last couple days and assisted us with coming up with our visions for this. And I want to thank CNU for accepting us as part of the grant program and doing this technical assistance grant. And our next steps will be this. I've collected everybody's information that attended any of our open houses and sign forums. If I didn't get your contact information yet, make sure I get it from you before you leave today. And we'll be having some follow-up meetings to follow up with all of you once we get our final plans from CNU and what our next steps might be. And we may need some more input from you as well. So we'll make sure that you're informed. We'll put it in our community bulletins. And thank you again for all your help.